My father's casket was still descending into the earth when my stepmother decided to tear my world apart. 47 relatives had gathered in that October cemetery, their breath visible in the cold morning air, their grief raw and real. And Vivian chose the precise moment when the mechanical whir of the lowering device filled the silence to step forward in her tailored black suit, raise one perfectly manicured finger, and point at me as though I were a defendant on trial. Before anyone could even suggest we let Sterling rest, her voice sliced through the chill. There is something everyone here needs to know about Brooke. My name in her mouth sounded like something venomous. I had known this woman for 8 years. I had watched her quietly relocate our family photographs so that images of my mother became increasingly difficult to find. I had endured her calculated exclusions, each one packaged inside a warm smile. But even I had never imagined she would do this here, at his grave, while the soil was still turned fresh and dark. This girl, she announced, extending her finger directly at me, has been living a lie for 32 years. She is not Sterling's biological daughter. The gasps moved through the crowd in waves. My Uncle Theodore fumbled his prayer book and watched it fall into the mud. My cousin Mallory seized my arm. Someone standing behind me breathed the words, "Oh my God." I could not inhale. I could not make my body move. My father had been dead for exactly 3 days, and Vivian was standing at his graveside attempting to excise me from his entire existence. "You are lying," I managed. My own voice sounded foreign to me, like it belonged to a stranger. She produced a folder she had been concealing beneath her coat. Sterling's blood type was O negative. Brooke is AB positive. The biology makes it impossible. I have the medical documentation right here. My stepbrother Dexter stood just beside her, 6 feet of self-satisfaction wrapped in an expensive suit. "Sorry, sis," he said, stretching the word out like it was part of a private joke. "Looks like you were never really family. Mom's already been in contact with the attorneys regarding the will." The ground beneath my feet seemed to shift. This was the man who had guided my hands on bicycle handlebars until I found my balance. The man who had walked beside me on my first day as a teacher, chest swollen with pride. The man who telephoned every single Sunday evening for no other reason than to hear about my week. Sterling Caldwell, who had built 3 hardware stores from almost nothing and introduced me to every employee, every customer, always identically. "This is my daughter, Brooke. She's going to be a teacher someday." And Vivian was standing at his grave, insisting that man had never truly been my father. "How dare you?" my Aunt Greta finally said, her voice trembling with a fury she was barely containing. "At his funeral, Vivian. Is there nothing sacred to you? I am simply telling the truth," Vivian replied, arranging her features into that practiced sweetness she had spent years perfecting. "Sterling's real legacy belongs to his actual blood. It belongs to Dexter." That was the moment Mr. Harwell cleared his throat. He had been standing without movement near the large oak at the cemetery's edge, briefcase held in both hands, with the composure of someone who had been anticipating this exact moment for a long time. Franklin Harwell had been my father's attorney and closest friend for 2 decades. He had attended my high school graduation, my college graduation, and even my very first parent-teacher evening when nerves had nearly undone me. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his deep and measured voice parting the chaos like a blade, "before you proceed any further, perhaps we should discuss what Sterling placed in my care." The certainty on Vivian's face developed a hairline fracture. "What are you referring to, Mr. Harwell?" He stepped forward with slow and deliberate purpose. Sterling anticipated this possibility. 6 months ago, he came to my office with precise instructions and a sealed package. He reached into the briefcase and withdrew a large manila envelope covered in my father's unmistakable handwriting. He told me, and I am quoting him exactly, "If Vivian attempts to claim that Brooke is not my daughter at any point following my death, you are to read this letter aloud immediately and play this recording. Do it in front of everyone, Franklin. Do not allow her to poison minds in private." The cemetery fell so completely silent that I could hear the distant murmur of traffic 2 streets away. 47 members of my family stood as though carved from stone. Even the funeral director, positioned respectfully beside the hearse, leaned forward slightly. On the front of the envelope, in my father's careful script, were the words to be opened only under circumstances discussed, and beneath that, a second line that sent heat rushing into my eyes. My daughter Brooke is my greatest achievement. I refuse to let the tears fall. Even now, even in this moment of orchestrated cruelty, my father was still present, still standing between me and the people who wanted to unmake me. "This is theatrical nonsense," Vivian said, though the authority had drained entirely from her voice. "I have medical records. Blood type science does not lie." "Indeed it does not," Mr. Harwell agreed with perfect calm. He produced a small digital recorder from his briefcase. Sterling was, above all else, a thorough man. He left both written documentation and his own recorded testimony. He looked at Vivian without blinking. "He was also aware of your preparations. He knew about the medical records you had compiled. He was aware of quite a great deal, actually. That is precisely why he ensured I had everything required to protect his daughter from what he described as posthumous character assassination." Dexter's expression finally collapsed. He glanced at his mother, then at Mr. Harwell, then at me. "This is a bluff," Vivian said, but her voice was shaking now. "Read the letter," I said. My voice was steadier than it had any right to be, carrying something I can only describe as my father's strength flowing through it still. Let every person standing here hear what he had to say. Mr. Harwell broke the seal with formal deliberation. The sound carried across the headstones like a small, decisive bell. "Wait," Vivian said, her face now the same ashen color as the October sky overhead. "This does not need to happen here. We can handle this privately." "But you already made it public," Aunt Greta said, her voice carrying an edge that could have cut through marble. "You opened this curtain yourself, Vivian. Let us all see how the performance ends." Mr. Harwell adjusted his reading glasses and began to speak my father's words written 6 months prior when Sterling Caldwell was still living and laughing and calling me every Sunday evening, yet somehow already preparing for this very moment. Before I can tell you what that letter contained, I need to tell you who my father was. Sterling Caldwell had built his first hardware store on a $1,000 loan, and his father's foundational belief that honest advice and quality tools could repair almost anything. By the time I arrived in the world, there were 3 locations. By the time I was 7 and cancer took my mother, those stores had become the architecture of our life together. Every Saturday morning, we would travel to each one. Dad would let me assist with inventory, teaching me to count washers and sort screws while telling me stories about my grandfather. He introduced me the same way to every single person we encountered. "This is my daughter, Brooke. She is going to be a teacher someday." The pride in his voice made me believe I was capable of anything. When my mother died, it was only the 2 of us. 15 years of Sunday pot roasts and Saturday store visits and telephone calls that always ended too soon. He never sought a replacement for her. He never attempted to fill that space. He simply loved me with greater intention and ensured I felt it every single day. Then Vivian entered our world. She arrived when I was 22, newly graduated and beginning my first teaching position. She was polished in that particular way that makes other women feel somehow insufficient. Blonde and immaculate, dressed in clothes that communicated wealth, even when she spoke of struggling financially. She had a teenage son named Dexter and a narrative about a hard divorce and a longing for stability. My father fell completely. After years of dates that led nowhere, of well-intentioned introductions that always concluded with him saying she is lovely, but she is not Angela, he was suddenly bringing Vivian to Sunday dinners and folding her into the fabric of our life. "I want you to like her, Brooke," he told me one evening on the back porch, just the 2 of us as the light faded. "I know no one can fill the space your mother left, but Vivian makes me genuinely happy, and Dexter has had a difficult time. That boy needs steadiness." So I made the effort. I truly did. But something never quite aligned. The way Vivian's smiles never fully reached her eyes when she looked at me. The way the living room photographs were quietly relocated so that my mother's face became peripheral. The way she would weave casual remarks about the store's property values into ordinary conversations, always followed by a small, airy laugh. After the wedding, the displacement began. Minor at first, plausible in isolation. "Brooke, sweetheart, wouldn't you be more comfortable in your room while Dexter and I help your father with the business planning?" Or did Sterling not mention? "We've adjusted the Saturday visits. Dexter needs that time with his new father, each one a deliberate nudge, each one repositioning me a little further from the center of my father's world. Dexter was worse when my father was absent. At 15, he was already taller than me, carrying his mother's sharp features and her calculating gaze. He would make remarks about being the only son, about continuing the Caldwell name, about the stores needing someone with a different kind of presence. Around my father, he transformed into the ideal stepson, eager and appreciative and deferential. But my father was not entirely deceived. He maintained our Saturday visits, scheduling them slightly earlier. He kept my photographs prominently displayed in his office. He left my childhood bedroom exactly as I had left it, and he never once failed to call on Sunday evening. 3 weeks before his death, he invited me to dinner, just the two of us, while Vivian and Dexter traveled for a college visit. He prepared my mother's pot roast from the recipe she had taught him early in their marriage. We ate in the comfortable silence of people who have spent decades together before he reached across the table and held my hand. "Brooke, there are things I need to say to you," he told me. His fingers were still strong, still carrying faint traces of oil from the stores despite Vivian's endless objections. "Not yet, the timing isn't right. But remember this, whatever anyone says after I am gone, you are my daughter. Blood does not create family. Love does, and I have loved you from the moment your mother told me she was expecting you. Dad, you are frightening me. I am only organizing my affairs. A man at my stage of life owes himself that much." He held my hand more firmly. "I have made certain you are protected. Mr. Harwell has everything arranged. Trust him if something happens. You are a Caldwell, Brooke, my daughter, my true heir. There is nothing and no one who can alter that." 4 days later, the heart attack claimed him. Swift, the doctor said, merciful. They discovered him at his original store, the one his father had started, seated at his desk with a photograph from my college graduation held in his hands, my mother and I smiling up at him. The service was everything he would have chosen for himself. His employees formed an honor guard outside the church. The building overflowed with people whose lives he had made better. His favorite hymns played softly as I stood at the podium and spoke about Saturday mornings and my mother's pot roast, and the Christmas Eve he had remained open until midnight because a grandmother needed a wrench to repair her grandson's bicycle. "Sterling Caldwell believed that tools could solve most problems," I said, gripping the wood to keep myself upright. "But his greatest instrument was love itself." Vivian occupied the front pew in a black designer suit, her expression managed with the precision of someone tracking their own performance. Dexter sat beside her, consulting his phone. Both had expressed a desire to speak at the service. Neither had found the occasion to prepare any remarks. Too overcome with grief, Vivian had explained to the minister, though I had overheard her that same morning on a call discussing property appraisals. Now, standing at the grave, Mr. Harwell held my father's letter in both hands and read, "To my beloved daughter, Brooke." I heard Vivian pull a sharp breath. What followed was my father's voice rendered in ink, unhurried and certain and absolute. The identical voice that had steadied my first bicycle ride, that had called every Sunday, that had made pot roast and held my hand and assured me I was protected. He confirmed what I had always known in the deepest part of myself, that he had been aware of Vivian's intentions all along, that he had spent 6 months quietly and methodically constructing a means to protect me, that the blood type argument, though biologically accurate, was a fact he had known for 32 years. Because he had been there when my mother, in a moment of frightened honesty, early in their marriage, had told him the truth. And his response then and for every day that followed had been unwavering. "You are my daughter. I chose you. There has not been a single day of your life when I considered you anything other than mine." He had also, with his characteristic thoroughness, secured his own legal documentation. A formal acknowledgement of paternity signed decades earlier, legally airtight under state law, witnessed and notarized and filed in a courthouse. Not tucked in a drawer where Vivian might discover it. Filed properly and permanently. The stores, the letter clarified, had been placed inside a trust specifically structured to prevent any contest from Vivian. Those terms had been drawn up 6 months prior, during the same visit in which my father had handed Mr. Harwell the sealed envelope. Vivian was entitled to the home and the financial terms of the prenuptial agreement she had signed, the one she had apparently either forgotten or believed she could find a way around. Dexter received nothing beyond what my father had already extended to him in life. The letter concluded quietly. "Brooke, I suspected you might be standing at my grave when these words reached you. I suspected it because I know Vivian, and I know she would select the moment of your greatest vulnerability. So I want you to hear my voice one final time. You are my greatest achievement. Not the stores, not the legacy I leave behind. You, the teacher. The girl who learned to ride a bicycle in our driveway and never once stopped being courageous. I am so profoundly proud of you. I will always be proud of you. Care for the stores, care for our people, and never allow anyone to tell you that you do not belong. You belong, Brooke. You have always belonged. With all my love, Dad." The cemetery held its silence. Then Aunt Greta began to weep, not the restrained grieving from before, but the deep, released kind that rises when something catastrophic has been narrowly prevented. Uncle Theodore retrieved his prayer book from the mud, straightened his jacket with quiet dignity, and walked past Vivian without a glance to come stand beside me. One by one, the family did the same. Vivian remained perfectly still. The folder at her side, her medical records, her 6 months of meticulous preparation, hung from her fingers like something she could no longer identify a purpose for. Her face had emptied entirely. The performance had finally been stripped away. Dexter looked at his mother, then at the ground. His phone was, for the first time all morning, completely still. "Mrs. Caldwell," Mr. Harwell said with quiet formality, closing the letter with the same measured precision he had used to open it. "I will be in touch regarding the proceedings. I would strongly advise retaining legal counsel." Vivian opened her mouth, closed it. Then she turned and walked away from my father's grave without a single word, Dexter trailing several steps behind her, his polished shoes finally collecting mud. I remained long after most of the others had gone, after the funeral director had completed his quiet and respectful work, after the last of the amber and gold leaves had drifted down from the trees my father used to call God's way of showing off. Mr. Harwell waited with me. "He talked about you constantly," he said at last, his voice carrying a warmth now that the formality had passed. Every meeting, every phone call, every time I was in his company, always Brooke this, Brooke that, the teacher, his greatest achievement. I looked at the headstone. Sterling James Caldwell, beloved father, not stepfather, not guardian, not any of the precise legal terminology the world reaches for when it wants to complicate love. Father, because that is what he was. That is what he chose to be 32 years ago, and every morning after. He chose me the same way he chose every person he ever employed, every customer he ever remained late for, every family he ever quietly helped. Not because obligation required it, but because it was simply the right thing to do. Because genuine love does not wait for biology to authorize it. The October air was cold and clean and perfectly still around me. I reached out and pressed my palm against the headstone the way you touch something you want to carry the feeling of forever. "I have got you, Dad," I said softly. "I will never let it fall." And I meant every single word.